Hi, and welcome to Nothing is Rocket Science, a podcast where we talk about everything related to science, people are passionate about. So we have scientists, science communicators, and educators on our podcast to help people understand their work in simple words, or answer some of the questions that you might have had, you've been pondering about during your pastime. So our guest for today is Dr. Anne Hilborn. She's currently a postdoctoral scholar in the Department of Evolution, Ecology, and Organismal Biology at the University of California Riverside. She finished her PhD in Virginia Tech on cheetah hunting behavior, which is what we're going to talk about in depth today. Her research focuses on how large carnivores impact the way smaller carnivores hunt and interact with their prey. Um, Besides being this really cool and amazing researcher, she's also a science communicator who's been actively talking about her work and posting really cool cheetah photographs on Twitter for a very long time. And she has also conducted teaching workshops and using social media for science communication during her time at Virginia Tech, during her PhD. So as a personal, I've been a big fan of your photographs and all the cool cheetah photographs and the Serengeti photographs that you've posted on Twitter for about 5 years. And I'm really happy to have you on my podcast today. So welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Right. Before we dive into it, first things first. Why cheetahs? Like, what made you study about cheetahs? I'm sure you've been getting this question often, but it's always good to talk about it again, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's not just because cheetahs are really amazing and really interesting to study, but I was very lucky that my father's a scientist, and when I was 12, we went on he had a sabbatical, and he went to Serengeti National Park to actually look at the wildebeest population. And Dr. Sarah Durant, who's head of the Serengeti Cheetah Project, was there, and I met her. And it turned out after I graduated from university that she was needing a research assistant for her cheetah project. And at the time, you could still sort of foreign researchers could come in and work in Tanzania without a master's degree, which is no longer the case. But at the time, I went in and sort of got to be the research assistant and the project manager. So I got to follow the cheetahs of Serengeti around for 3.5 years, which was absolutely amazing. And I fell in love with the place and fell in love with cheetahs. And then a couple years later, I got some funding to do a master's degree, and Sarah allowed me to use sort of the 30 years of observational data on cheetahs that the project had amassed since 1980 to look at their hunting behavior, which is a pretty unique thing to look at because most carnivores are either really shy, or they live in really dense habitats where they're hard to watch, like forests, or they're nocturnal. And cheetahs are none of those, at least in Serengeti. It's a very open habitat. They are mostly active during the day. And in Serengeti, they're fairly used to cars because there's a lot of tourist activity. And so you can park sort of a safe distance, a respectful distance away, and just watch them do their behavior, which isn't really common for big carnivores. And so we had this amazing data set of observations of their hunting behavior, and it hadn't really been analyzed particularly deeply. So I during my master's degree, I used those data to look at things that affect their hunting success, and broke it down into the stalk, the chase, and sort of the overall success of a hunt. And then for my PhD, I looked at a sort of a bunch of different other things having to do with hunting behavior. But there was just so much data and so many sort of different aspects of hunting behavior to look at in cheetahs, that I was able to do sort of 7 total years of sort of research on cheetah hunting behavior. So I was extremely lucky and extremely privileged to sort of get into it the way I did. But it's so fantastic. Cheetahs are so great. And I'm really happy that I was able to sort of look at a topic that I find really fascinating.
Right, like you were able to, probably like marry your passion with your profession, which is really great.
Yeah, it is, because that's not always the case. And so
Right.
to be able to sort of study something so fascinating and to go to a place that is just an ecologist's dream. Serengeti
Yeah.
is an astonishing place to work if you're interested in the natural world. And to be able to do that and sort of get multiple degrees out of it and sort of make a
Right.
living for a couple of years is really cool.
Right. Yeah, before we get into talking in detail, can you tell us a bit about your ongoing research and your projects? What are you working on currently?
So my position at UC Riverside is actually completely unrelated to cheetahs or to
Oh,
carnivore
okay.
research. My job is to create online classes for their biology department. So
Right.
I did sort of, my PhD, I've done more of a shift into teaching, which
Mm.
I learned. I started teaching during my PhD and unexpectedly really loved it. And so one of the great things about doing a PhD is that, at least in the system that I was in, is that you do get teaching experience. And so it opens up more opportunities and more avenues for your passions and for your future, than just research.
Right.
Because research is great a lot of the time, but not everybody sort of wants to do it forever. So I'm
Hmm.
sort of making more of a shift in right now.
Okay, that's great. Um, until I read about your work and your blogs, I thought hunting was just hunting. And then, like, the more I read, I understood that every carnivore has, its own pattern of hunting. So can you tell us what exactly, like, I'm pretty, it's like just, you hunt for your prey, you eat food, and that's it. But um, like the more I read your blogs and some of your research work, I figured that every animal or every carnivore has its own hunting behavior or a hunting pattern. So can you just throw some light on that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways that animals in general find and consume their food. And when we talk about carnivores, they're sort of more similar to each other than, say, a bat and a cheetah, but there's still a lot of variation in the way that carnivores hunt. And even in the species in Serengeti, there are a lot of carnivores in Serengeti, but even within those, there's multiple different strategies depending on the species that is doing the hunting and the species that they're hunting. So just to use sort of lions and cheetahs as an example. So cheetahs are a stalk and chase predator. So they sort of
Okay.
stalk up as they can to their prey, and then they do a really fast chase. And they don't have that much stamina. Like they can't, I think the longest chase I ever saw was about a minute, and they are done after that. But the thing that cheetahs mostly know, or people mostly know about cheetahs, is that they're the fastest land
Fastest, yeah.
animal. So they can, go up to 60 miles an hour, but they can't sustain it. And so if they can't get if they can't stalk close enough to their prey, there's a chance that they won't actually be able to catch it, even if they're super, super fast. While lions don't have that speed. So they also do stalk, but it's more an ambush. They have to get a lot closer, and then they can only do, I actually haven't seen that many lions hunt, but I think their chases tend to only be like 15 or 30 seconds. They have to get really close. And then they also do, because they live communally, they can hunt multiple lions can hunt the same prey at the same time. While cheetahs tend to be solitary, that's not completely true. We'll get into that later.
Mhm.
And then other predators who are like hyenas or wild dogs, which don't really do a hunt, but they have stamina. So they will chase a gazelle at 25 or 30 miles an hour for minutes, like for 10 minutes, and just wear them down. And so within the sort of the big carnivores in Serengeti, you have sort of stalk and chase, you have ambush predators, which leopards as well are kind of with lions and that. And then you have
Mhm.
coursing who have stamina, don't have great speed, but they can keep up. They can run for 15 minutes, 20 minutes at 25, 30 miles an hour. And so your poor prey, I always feel bad for Thompson gazelle because all of these carnivores hunt Thompson's gazelle, and they have to be able to escape all of these different types of
Right.
ways that predators are coming at them that require fairly different strategies to escape.
Right.
So there's depending on what species you're talking about, the hunt looks very different and has different stages to it.
Interesting. Like, I'm a vision science researcher, and we talk about we try to find out we've studied about the positioning of eyes and predators and prey,
Yeah.
and like the positioning of eyes so that they get a wider field of view. But that's all from the
Mhm.
visual aspect. But so I've understood that only from the visual aspect. But now understanding the hunting behavior and putting this together, it sounds pretty complex, and there's a lot of adaptations that a prey has to do to save itself, I guess.
Yeah,
That's
so a lot of sort of ungulates, so the things that large carnivores like to eat, which are things like impala and gazelles, they are very vigilant. So they spend, one of their big trade-offs in life is like, how much time do I spend with my head down feeding where I can't
mhm,
see a possible predator? How much time do I spend looking around for predators that I can't eat at the same time? And so they tend to have at least gazelles have this very jerky way of looking around. Like they always look really
wow.
stressed and really nervous when
Yeah.
they're scanning for predators, because there's at least 6 or 7 predators in Serengeti that really like to eat Thompson's gazelle. And
Wow.
so they have a lot to watch out for. And so they use vision a lot, and they also use hearing. One of the
Mm,
cool things about some of the species in Serengeti is that they will warn each other. If one of them sees a predator, they'll either snort or stamp their feet in a way
right.
that sort of lets others know around them that they've seen something scary and it's time to like put your head up and pay attention and watch out.
Right.
So they use their ears as well to sort of listen for cues from other members of their group that
Hmm.
there's something scary near.
Right. Yeah, I think I mean I'm sure all of us have seen things like this on National Geographic and Discovery channels where like they come in herd, and they're probably drinking water, and then you see all of a sudden
Mm.
you hear them communicate with each other with their sounds, the peculiar sounds, and yeah, and then they start the chase even before the predator is like even in the vicinity. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm pretty sure it must have been a great experience watching in person, not on TV. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right. Can you tell us about the interaction of cheetahs with other carnivores? Like, how are they different from their other feline counterparts?
So in Serengeti, which is where I have the most experience, there are 6 cat species. There's lions, leopards, cheetahs, which are smaller than both of those. And then there's 3 of the small cats, which are servals, caracals, and wildcats. And those are sort of house cat and a little bit bigger sized. So you have 3
Hmm.
of the sort of big cat and 3 little cats. But cheetahs are fairly small in the grand scheme of big cats. So they are for speed and not for power. So
Right.
the things that lions and leopards have is sort of, they're really heavily muscled, especially leopard neck, because one of their strategies is to carry their prey up trees. And
Mm.
so leopards, and all of that strength, or a lot of it, comes in their neck. So leopards are extremely muscled in their sort of head and neck area. Um, Cheetahs are not. So in a vaguely rude way of describing them, someone, I think on Twitter, I can't remember exactly who it was, described them as a bowling pin shaped, because when they sit up, they've got this tiny little head, and then they sort of have these slight shoulders. And I prefer to think of it as sort of a little triangle on top of a big triangle. But they're built for speed, and you can't really have power and speed at the same time. There's
Mm.
trade-offs. They have um, they have a very lithe musculature, like their bodies are sort of built like a greyhound. So they have this sort of deep chest and then a thin waist, and they have, muscly legs for a cheetah, but nothing compared to lions or leopards. Like if you sometimes on those wildlife documentaries, they take a shot of a bunch of lions like walking towards the camera,
Right.
and their
Right.
muscles just like rippling all over
Ripped.
their
Yeah.
legs.
Right.
Just don't really have that. They don't they're just built different. And because of the need for increased oxygen when they run really quickly. They have a really small jaw so that they can have more space in the nasal cavity for oxygen uptake. So they don't really have powerful crushing jaws that you see in lions and leopards. And then they have, they're the only cat that doesn't have retractable claws. They have dog-like claws. And it's thought that that helps them grip the ground when they run, and so that they can turn more quickly. Right. But it also means their claws are dull, so they don't have the super sharp claws that other cats can use to sort of grab onto prey and rake them. So they have kind of weak claws. Their teeth aren't super large. They're not really muscly in the same way, and they don't have the claws. So they're just different. They have to rely on speed rather than power to bring down their prey. And that sort of feeds into their hunting strategies, which are to chase after them, hit the back of the legs, and the prey goes tumbling, and then they try to get onto the throat for a sort of suffocating bite as quickly as possible, while avoiding all the antlers and the horns or the kicky legs or anything that might injure them. And so there's a limit to the size of prey they can go for, while lions, because they're larger and more muscly and sort of hunt as a group, sometimes can take down things like buffalo, giraffe, or eland, while cheetahs are limited in the size of things they can take down. So they tend to focus on more medium antelope, and then things like hares and fawns and baby gazelle and things like that are smaller and easier to kill.
Interesting. And I also read that cheetahs are probably one of, I don't know if it's the only animal, or if one of the few animals, they don't roar, right?
They don't roar, you mean?
Yeah. Or do they?
Yeah, they don't have, they don't really have the physical throat characteristics. I think it's in the larynx, but I'm not sure. To make that full body roar that lions and leopards even do. But what they do is they have a variety of other vocalizations that are really sometimes unexpected in such a large cat. So their contact call is very high pitched and sounds bird-like. So if a mother and cubs get separated, or a coalition of brothers get separated, they will chirp for each other, which is really, really effective, because it's such a almost pathetic sounding call, and it sort of inspires a lot of emotions, like, oh no, they really want to get back. As a scientist, you try to rein in your anthropomorphization, but it's unexpected to have a fairly large cat make this bird-like sound. Another thing which is utterly, if you get close enough to a cheetah to hear it purr, it is an amazing sound. And if you grew up with domestic cats, hearing an much larger cat make a sort of deeper, throatier version of that purr is really special.
Right. And what is special about their spots? I did read that, is it like a fingerprint? Like, do each animal have a different spot, have different spots, or?
Yeah, and that is one of the reasons why it's easy to study them and to tell individuals apart, is that each individual cheetah has a different spot pattern. So that's how we identify who they are in the field, is by taking pictures. Mostly, so the best picture to identify them is if they're standing side on, and you can see all the spots on their side and the upper shoulder. And then we actually had a computer program that would sort of match spots for us, which was really helpful, because back in old days, all the researchers had to do it by eye for all of the cheetahs, and that is really time consuming. So it was great. And the technology has really improved even since I used it. And a lot of different animals who have individual markings are now identified by computer. But because they have different spot patterns, we can know who we see again and again, and we can build family relationships. We see a female with her cubs, and then we see those cubs when they're adults. We can tell that, oh, that was that cub from that female 2 years ago, and therefore we know that this adult is actually related to this adult, and we can start to build family trees of the
Wow.
cheetahs in Serengeti.
That's...
So
So you're
you can
basically
just,
marking them. It's like marking them, right?
yeah, it's natural. You don't have to interact with them. And so allows you to get a lot more information about individuals' behavior and population dynamics when you know how many individuals you have, instead of just saying we had 500 sightings of cheetahs in a year. You can say we saw 150 individuals in 500 sightings. That sort of thing is really a level of detail that allows you to ask a lot of different questions about population dynamics and individual behavior.
Wow, this is great. I'm like already really excited. Yeah, coming to the next, I was just I skimmed through your paper about how cheetahs outsmart lions and hyenas. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Outsmarting is a little bit generous. They are,
Okay.
so
For the lack
cheetahs,
of a better word.
yeah. Let's call it outsmart.
Yeah.
Um, as I talked about before, are physically not as powerful as lions and hyenas. And so within carnivores, there tends to be a situation where larger carnivores tend to be aggressive to smaller carnivores and to each other.
Right.
And we're not entirely sure why, but lions and hyenas will take, if a cheetah is on a kill, eating away, if a lion or hyena sees that, they'll come and they'll most often chase the cheetah off and take the kill, which is called kleptoparasitism. So they're sort of scavenging from the cheetah. And then they also sometimes kill cubs. So one of the leading causes for cheetah cubs in Serengeti is actually lions, because they will, if they find, it's usually when they're really, really young and they're in the den, and then a lion will find them and sort of kill the whole litter. Adult cheetahs are not as vulnerable to being killed by lions, though it does happen. I've heard several stories about it. But so the cheetahs are sort of understandably quite wary around lions, not so much around hyenas, because hyenas are mostly scavenging rather than directly killing them. But there's a lot of behaviors that cheetahs do to avoid interacting with these larger carnivores. And when a cheetah is on a kill, when it's eating a gazelle, that is a point of contention, because that's something that attracts lions and hyenas, because they're like, free meal, excellent. While the cheetah, they're thinking, I've just spent so much energy to kill this animal and it's mine, I need to eat it. And so one of the things I looked at is how much time different cheetahs spend on a kill, sort of from when the hunt starts to when they finish eating. So that includes all the hunt, the time it takes to kill them, and then the time it takes to eat. And that's something that we refer to as handling time. So how much time do they spend handling the prey? And it varies between cheetahs. I mean, a lot of it depends on how big the prey is. Smaller things take less time to eat than bigger things, which is understandable. But what we found is that male cheetahs who don't have cubs and aren't really vulnerable to lions and hyenas necessarily, they don't spend much time being vigilant. Like if they're on a kill, they spend most of their time eating. So head down, not really scanning for danger. But what they're doing is sort of eating as quickly as possible. They're minimizing the amount of time they spend in this exposed, potentially dangerous situation. And that's true for single female cheetahs as well, those who don't have cubs. While females with cubs, they've got a bunch of other worries to think about. Like they have to not just only be vigilant for themselves, but for their cubs who are actually in danger from lions or hyenas coming in. And so they spend much more time going like this. And what that does is means they can't eat as quickly. They can't be super fast. They can't minimize their risk by spending less time in a risky situation. They're kind of stuck there. And so they spend a lot of time looking around, and that actually allows their cubs to eat as much as they need, because cubs are really, like many baby animals, are really slow and playful when they eat. Like they don't really have the message of like, okay, get this done, we need to leave. They're, you know, they're
Right.
playing around their
Mhm.
food, they're playing with each other, they're taking little naps. They're just generally not super quick at this. And
Yeah,
so
babies,
for,
typical babies. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So for them to eat as much food as they need, even though their bellies are quite small, it takes a while, especially if there's a lot of them. So the fact that mothers with cubs spend a lot of time at the kill means that the cubs can eat as much as they need. And also when they're older, the female needs to teach them how to hunt. So what she does, which is gruesome to a lot of people, is she will capture, say, a baby gazelle and bring it back alive to her cubs who are about 6 months or older, and then release it. And the gazelle kind of startles and then tries to run away. And the cubs will then chase it and practice their hunting skills, because it's a real skill to be able to identify your prey, chase it down, and kill it properly. And cheetah cubs need to learn that, and it takes a long time.
Right.
Like many of them become independent from their mother at around 18 months. And some of them are still not very good at hunting. Like a lot of the chase is very instinctual. Like if something runs from them, they will chase it and they will knock it down. But learning that you need to actually kill it and how to do that takes a while. And one of the hardest things that I found being a carnivore researcher is watching cheetahs kill things really badly and really slowly. Because the gazelle is bleeding and screaming and like not, you know, obviously in pain, and the cheetahs are sort of patting at it and biting at it, but they don't really know how to kill it properly. And so this takes a lot of time, which adds to the mother's handling time. And so it's out there in a risky situation for a long time. So what she does to minimize that risk is be really vigilant. And so you spend a lot of time, the females are sort of looking around while all her cubs are eating away. And she's done all the work to get that kill. And you're like, you need to eat too. But
True.
she needs to keep her cubs more than she needs necessarily to eat her full on one meal. So that's one of the things that my research and PhD focused at, is like the differences in how cheetahs spend their time actually on a kill, and how that depends on the threats that they have from lions and hyenas.
Wow. And I've read this somewhere that among the lions, it's the lioness who go, or is it the tigress? I'm not really sure. It's the females who go for hunting and bring back food. Is it the same scenario with the cheetahs too?
So cheetahs are mostly solitary. So most cats, other than lions, the adults are solitary. Cheetahs have this, I don't want to say hybrid, but they just have this sort of mixture of social structures, which is another thing that makes them really fascinating to study, is that, so you have mothers, you have females, and then when they don't have cubs, they're solitary. And then they do have cubs, they have their cubs, if they don't get killed by lions, for about 18 months. And then after that, she sort of kicks them out, and the siblings will stay together for a while. If their female siblings will stay with their sibling group for about 6 months until they're about 2 years old, and then they will leave to go on their solitary life. While the brothers, if there are brothers, will stay together for life. So brothers form lifelong coalitions together. And another really fascinating thing about cheetahs is that if a male doesn't have a brother, in this sort of weird time when they're an adolescent, sometimes they will join up with another single male, or occasionally maybe another coalition of males, and form a coalition together with unrelated males, which is pretty rare it doesn't happen in the cat world, but it's a pretty rare strategy to sort of form lifelong coalitions with non-family members as an adult, at least in carnivores. And so you have single males sometimes who never found another male to form a coalition with. You have coalitions of brothers, and then you sometimes have coalitions of unrelated males. And so those are sort of the social groups that you see. And the male coalitions will do everything together. So they hunt together, they travel together, they groom each other, they sort of sleep at the same time. And the thing that I was never really able to dive into, but I find really intriguing, is how the mating system then works. So whether coalitions of males sort of cooperatively somehow work together
Like a
to mate with
wingman.
females. And if that differs depending on whether a coalition of brothers versus a coalition of strangers. And that is a question that I would love to have answered. And we're making baby steps. Like we did a whole, part of my job was to collect poop when I was a research assistant, because that's
Right.
how we looked at paternity. Because we know who the mothers are because we followed them since they were cubs, and we know who the individuals are. We don't know what males are fathering cubs. And so the way to do that is to collect poop.
Wow.
So I spent a lot of time sitting, watching cheetahs, waiting for them to poop, which they don't do all that often. But once we had fecal samples, we could extract the DNA and then figure out what males were fathering cubs. And this work was done in kind of in the 2000s. And what we found is that, or what, so the researchers found, I just collected poop for them, is that female cheetahs are very promiscuous. So they're mating with multiple males. And sometimes within a litter, the cubs will have different fathers.
Oh, wow.
And there's this, and we had enough specific examples of like a trio of 3 males, and then we had a litter of cubs, and 2 of them were fathered by 2 of the males, but then the 3rd male somehow didn't get to be a father. And there's all these sort of exciting hints of how this social thing might work, but we just don't know enough to like really get a handle on the trade-offs that male cheetahs are making between their own reproductive success and the reproductive success of their brothers. And then what do you do if it's not your brother type situation? So I find it fascinating. We just don't yet have the data on how that really works. But I'd love to know.
The point that you mentioned that cheetahs are actually like, especially the cubs are killed by lions and like the pride of lions. So do they kill them for food, or just that they're being big bullies?
So they don't eat them. And we don't think it's for food. And there isn't, so another hypothesis is that they're competitors. So the lions are getting rid of other big cats who are competitors. That's possible. The thing is that cheetahs tend to really focus on smaller prey like gazelles and hares and impala, while lions focus a lot on wildebeest and zebra and buffalo and warthogs. And so their sort of competition for prey is not particularly severe. It is, but it's common within cats that they will be aggressive and kill each other. So I think, like you said, they're just bullies. And it's not just a lion thing. I've seen cheetahs just go after and chase jackals just for fun, just because they want, they're taking out their aggression or don't like, I've seen them chase jackals. I've seen them chase servals. There just seems to be this thing where cats are jerks and they will try to beat up or chase anything smaller than them, whether they can eat it or not. So there's a lot of aggression within carnivore species and within cat species that does lead to injury and death. But other than they're just big bullies explanation, I haven't seen another like really compelling reason why they do that.
Or maybe they're just marking, the territory, saying, yeah, you know what, this is my territory, and you're not allowed to eat or take anything.
Yeah, the thing is that cheetahs are really, really mobile, so they don't really have territories. Females have these really big home ranges that they sort of spend time in as they follow the gazelles who are actually following the rain, following the green grass. And so Serengeti is a very seasonal place. You have a dry season and a wet season. And so the gazelles move really big distances depending on where the green grass is. And the female cheetahs tend to follow. And some males are nomadic and do that too. And then some males are territorial, and they guard these quite small territories, actually. They're only about 30 square kilometers. And that's another thing. We don't know why they do that. Like, we haven't shown conclusively that territorial males are able to father more cubs. That is one of the major ideas behind territoriality in males in cats, is that you have a territory and you get the matings from the females who overlap with you. And the territory is what helps you increase your reproductive success. But we haven't really shown in cheetahs. It could be true, we just aren't sure. And so the fact that nomadic males also get to father cubs makes it this sort of thorny, interesting problem about why some males are territorial and some males aren't. But what I'm trying to say with this is that cheetahs will overlap with lion territories, but not sort of all the time, and they move around a lot. So if killing the cheetahs doesn't necessarily like remove them from your territory, because more will come in following the gazelles. So it's, yeah, I think it's just sort of the big bullies / being jerks. It's just the way cats are.
Yeah.
A lot of animals are, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
My next question was, can you tell us a bit about, I'm not sure if, like based on your observation and what makes cheetahs the fastest land animals? Like I understand you told us a little bit about the anatomy, like the probably the skinny legs or the lean muscle build and things like that. But what are the other characters that makes it maybe anatomically and evolutionary? Why are they like what makes them the fastest land animals?
Yeah, so aside from the features I've already mentioned, so the slim build and the long legs, they also have a very flexible spine. And if you film cheetah running at full speed and then slow it down, you can see that their spine, when they're
Right.
fully stretched, so in the full, it's not I don't think it's literally a gallop, because that may not be the precise way to describe that stride, but when they're in full stretch, all four feet are off the ground, and their spine is sort of almost curved back upwards, and gives them this massive stride, and then they hit the ground and then curl up so that almost all 4 feet are kind of bunched at the same time, and so then they're curved in. And so this hyper flexible spine means that they can make these giant strides, which is, I think, one of the ways that they can get up to speed so quickly and also get to that super high speed. So they have thin legs, thin long legs, a hyper flexible spine, not much muscle mass to slow them down. And then they have a small head with increased oxygen. Sort of capacity to breathe. And then they have relatively enlarged heart and lung to sort of keep that oxygen really pumping through their system while they're doing so much cardio exercise.
Right.
And so, like I mentioned, then they have these little like cleats on their feet to allow them to grip the soil. Because one of the ways that their prey escape them is by being really by doing a lot of cuts and turns. Because gazelle don't run. Yeah, right. Zigzags, exactly. Because gazelles don't run 60 miles an hour. Like if it's just a straightaway speed contest, the cheetah will always win. So the gazelle instead do a lot of dodging and cutting and turning. And because they're a little bit smaller, they can do that slightly faster than a cheetah can. And so the cheetahs with their claws sort of helps them dig in as they're dodging and turning. And then their super long, flexible tail helps them keep their balance as they're doing these really sharp maneuvers. And so so much of their body is built around being as fast as possible, and then, but also being able to retain some agility so that they can follow a gazelle as it's zigzagging around.
Wow.
But it means that they've had to, sacrifice is the wrong word, but there's trade-offs so that they can't have a lot of the other powerful physical features that many other cats have. Or they don't do some of the strategies, like the serval, which is one of the really small cats, is an amazing jumper. Like they can jump many times their body caracals as well. And cheetahs, that's not that's not their strategy at all. Like they are physically incapable of doing much jumping. And they're also really bad at trees. So lions and leopards can kind of climb trees, but because cheetahs have those double claws and those long legs are extremely awkward in trees, but they sometimes climb for various reasons, and they just look so ridiculous most of the time because they look really awkward and uncomfortable, and they're not quite sure how they got there, but now they're up there and they don't really know how to get down.
Like a fish out of water, it's not their treat. Yeah, it's not their trait. So, so the photographs, or like I remember watching this in movies too. So the ones on the trees are leopards and not cheetahs, right?
Yes, in general, except sometimes cheetahs go up trees and they're spotted, and it can be confusing.
Right.
But if you see an attractive, graceful cat lounging in a tree, if you see sort of a spotted cat kind of awkwardly stuck up a tree and doesn't really know what to do, it's probably a cheetah.
It's cheetah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, like I've seen that. I think, right. And how are they different from panthers? I mean, I know they're different colors and stuff, like a pumas and panthers. Like, how are they different from that? Because they are pretty agile and they're like the stealth and in terms of stealth. So how are they different from these animals?
So panthers, at least in North America, refer to mountain lions, which are also known as cougars, which have a bunch of other names.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they are they're also agile, and they're powerful than cheetahs. Like they're not as solid as a leopard or a lion, but they are strong, muscular animals. And so they are sort of kind of an in-between. Like they're not stalk and chase necessarily. They're more ambush predators in the sense that they try to get as close as possible and then explode out on their prey and try to use power to overwhelm them. But panthers have a fairly small head compared to lions or leopards, but it's not quite as small as cheetahs. It's proportional. But they have sort of heavily muscled front legs, and they don't have that really waspy waist because they don't do that super fast run. They are stalk or they are ambush predators, and I think sometimes they jump out of trees on prey, which is pretty cool. Which is kind of what birds can do as well. So there's they do a mixture of strategies that you see in other cats because they're pretty generalist. So mountain lions in North America are found from northern Canada all the way down to the very bottom of South America. And they vary in habitat and in physical size and in the prey that they eat. But they're all the same species, and they are just really, really adaptable and really variable as well. And so they're almost like the leopards of the Americas, because leopards throughout Africa and Asia are really adaptable. You find them in big cities like Nairobi or Mumbai, and you'll find them in deserts, and you'll find them in forests, and you'll find them in savannas. They are incredibly adaptable and can sort of take whatever habitat they find themselves in, even if it is an urban habitat, and make a living. And actually here on the West Coast, like you'll find mountain lions right outside of LA. They are not super comfortable in big urban areas, but if there's enough prey and there's just enough wildlands, they'll make it work. There's a lot of issues around mountain lions around the LA area, but they're still there, amazingly, hanging on.
Wow. And it was also shocking to know that one of the fastest animal also faces a lot of threats. Like we were talking about how hyenas and lions also hunt the cubs. So can you tell us a little bit about what are the different types of threats, both in terms of an animal threat and in terms of poaching, like caused by humans? So
yeah. So like a lot of carnivores around the world, sort of human impacts are the biggest threats at the moment. lions and hyenas will kill their cubs in Serengeti. It's not the same necessarily, depending on if you go to different places, different populations of cheetahs. There may not be any lions anymore in some of the other places they live. But the big threats are loss of habitat as it gets converted to land or agriculture or urban or suburban. Suburban isn't quite the right word, but sort of as human infrastructure changes habitat, cheetahs struggle. They're not so great around humans like leopards are. And then actually one of the really frustrating things is that they are really impacted by the pet trade, actually, because they are one of the big cats that, I don't want to say they're easily tameable, but they are not the worst pets in the world. Like, big cats make horrible pets because they're large, they're aggressive, and a lot of their instincts are to kill things. And so lions, tigers, and leopards are terrible in captivity from a pet point of view. But cheetahs are actually fairly easily tameable. And so they make pets, it is possible to keep them as a pet without endangering yourself fully. Okay. And so there is a fairly large pet trade, mostly going from, as far as I know, from sort of Ethiopia and Somalia and northern Kenya, taking cubs out of the wild and then selling them to the pet trade, mostly in the Middle East, but also around the world. And the survival rate, we don't, because this is sort of underground wildlife trade. We don't have great numbers on this, but we very much think that a lot of the cubs that get taken out of the wild do not survive. And so this huge draw of taking cheetah cubs out of the wild, and then like there's no cheetah cubs left to sort of renew those populations. And so, and they're kept in really poor conditions when they're being transported, and it's a really heartbreaking and cruel fate for cheetahs. And so that's the good thing about that, is that can be changed sort of easily, with easily being a relative term, with education and public sort of campaigns to stop a non-essential behavior of people involving cheetahs, while use change is a much more complex and tricky issue to deal with. So there are, as with all carnivores, there's a number of different threats, and humans are involved with a lot of them. One of the things I hear a lot from people is they ask about genetic inbreeding, because that's one of the stories around cheetahs, is that there was a genetic bottleneck 10,000 years ago, and they're all inbred, and that's a problem. The thing is, it doesn't actually appear to be a problem, at least in wild cheetahs. Like, wild cheetahs are very capable of producing cubs. They have a pretty fast, I'm forgetting the right word, I'm just gonna say turnaround time. Like their gestation is only months. And so if they lose a litter to lions or hyenas or poaching, 3 months later, the female can produce another litter of 4 to 6 cubs. And most of the cubs survive in the wild. So there's not, or at least, they don't die in utero or necessarily die in the den. So breeding is not a problem in the wild. In captivity, people have had real trouble breeding cheetahs. And I don't know very much about that, except it's one of those things that cheetahs are hard to breed in captivity. And so I think that has fed into the idea that they're not very successful. But in the wild, the genetics doesn't appear to have impacted their success. Populations, when they have room and food and can do what they want, are pretty good. It's just when you bring in these other sort of human impacts that's what really hammers them. So I'd like to assure people don't have to worry necessarily about wild cheetahs being inbred in wild populations. It's actually, I'll put a caveat on that though. In a lot of areas in South Africa, cheetahs tend to be in very relatively small private game reserves. only have a few cheetahs in them. And so there has to be, or the way that they do it is very active management of moving cheetahs around from within a bunch of private game reserves so that they don't get even more inbred. Because if you only have 10 in one area, you can't really, if you just let them sort of breed as they will, you will get some very inbred cheetahs. And so there's this sort of active relocation program where the managers of those areas move cheetahs around to try to minimize inbreeding. But in sort of wild ranging populations like you have in the greater Serengeti area, inbreeding isn't a problem.
So do you think they are in the vulnerable to endangered list or not yet?
They are, if I get this wrong, I'm going to get a lot of scorn. I think they're listed by the IUCN as threatened. The last time they did an assessment. The thing is that cheetahs are hard to count, which is a thing with a lot of carnivores. In Serengeti, they're fairly easy to count, but once you get into brushy habitat and once you get into cheetahs who aren't comfortable around cars, they're really hard to see. And so counting them is a challenge. Thankfully, now we're starting to get a lot more use of camera traps, which is a way to count and record a lot of elusive species. And so our estimates are getting better, but it's still like hard to put up camera traps all, from Ethiopia down to South Africa and then up to Namibia. Like they cover a lot of ground. So as with a lot of species, our estimates of their numbers are pretty rough. And so it may have changed since the last assessment. I'm not sure when the last assessment was, but they're not in dire straits. They're not horrendously endangered, but it's concerning, especially if land use change keeps happening and if the pet trade keeps stealing cubs from the wild. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know we don't have much control over animal behavior, like the other carnivore behavior, but at least if we can try to reduce human involvement, I think that would definitely impact their numbers, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. We can leave them alone, and it's just like this is a natural part of ecology that smaller carnivores get killed by bigger carnivores. So it's just the way it is. But the human aspects are the things that we can control more easily, and those are probably the levers we should try to affect for conservation.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience at Serengeti? Because it's definitely on my list, my travel list, and I definitely want to go there, especially, the migration. I've seen that on TV and it really looks interesting. I've seen the hot air balloon rides where you can actually see the migration happening. But yeah, if you can, tell us about your observations and your experience at Serengeti during your master's and PhD.
Yeah, so the big chunk of time I spent in Serengeti was actually before any grad school. It was just when I was a research assistant, but it was, my job was to wake up before dawn and then to go out in a Land Rover and drive around and look for cheetahs. And when I found them, identify who they were. So we had digital cameras. And so I'd take a picture of their spots. So I'd have to wait for them to stand up and get into a good position. I'd take a picture of their spots. And then I had a box of ID cards that either I would, if I had free time, sort of downtime while waiting for them to do something else, you sort of get out who you think it might be based on age and sex and where they are. And then because digital cameras, you can look at the picture in the back, you can sort of get on the spot sometimes. But you can't figure out who it is. We would take it back to the computer back at the research house and run that program. So once I would record a bunch of basic data. So age, sex, the habitat, the location, sometimes how many prey there were around, things like that. And then a lot of my job was, as I said before, waiting for them to poop. And so I just sat there and watched them and waited for them to poop, which is not the most exciting thing in the world. Like a lot of cheetahs spend a lot of time sleeping, a bit less than lions. Lions spend even more time sleeping, but cheetahs spend a lot of time not doing much. And so you would sort of, you know, watch them sleep. And then when they sort of got up to do something else, that's why we were like, aha, maybe this will be a transition period when they decide to poop. And so I sort of got really good at spotting that the sort of half crouch that cats get into when they're getting ready to poop. And you're like, okay, so you get the camera because you need to clearly ID who's pooping. And then you also want a picture kind of where it's happening, because once the cheetah left and was far enough away that they couldn't see me, I had to get out of the car and try to find this fairly small poop in all the grass. And that was a real challenge for me. And so sometimes tourists would drive by and they would see me sort of wearing gloves, bent over the grass, just sort of like hunching around in a circle, trying to sort of circle my way around the area I thought the poop was. And I don't know how their guides explained to them what I was doing, so I'm not sure they knew either. And actually I ended up a lot of the time identifying where it was by smell, because like many cat poops, cheetah poops are quite smelly, and it was often easier to smell it from a distance than it was to see it. I'd sort of be hunched over, sniffing the grass. But an amazing amount of wildlife research is actually based on fecal samples, because you can get the DNA, you can where you don't watch them hunt, you can look at the fur of what they're eating, so you can identify what species they're eating. You can look at hormones sometimes, you can look at stress levels. I mean, there's just so much data in a poop. And so this is that has been pretty useful for me in my other life as a wildlife biologist, is like a lot of it has to do with looking for poop. And then, so once I sort of got the poop, got the data, whatever, then I would, depending on the time, keep driving, try to find another cheetah, because we had sort of a quota of the number of different cheetahs we had to see per month in order to have enough data to make good estimates of the population size and of survival and things like that. And so there was always this sort of stressful, gotta find another cheetah, gotta find another cheetah.
It's like a sales call that you have to finish a number of this number per day, like a quota. How many have you seen, by the way? Like how many cheetahs have you seen?
Oh boy. I think so. Every time we saw a cheetah, it got a sighting number, and it was any sort of cheetah or cheetah social group. So if you saw a single female, that was a sighting. If you saw a female with cubs, that was a sighting. If you saw a coalition of males, that was a sighting. And so I think by the end I had maybe 11, maybe 12, I might have broken 1,200 sightings.
Wow.
Between the time when I was a research assistant and then I did another 9 months of field work for my PhD. So yeah, I spent a lot of time watching cheetahs, and it was just, what I love about them is that they're endlessly fascinating. One of the big lessons of my PhD, so I went in to do more field work for my PhD, thinking to myself, okay, I've done 3.5 years of field work on cheetahs before. I know something about how they work. So I planned my research design around a bunch of assumptions I had made about when they move, when they hunt, when they don't hunt. And then I got back to Serengeti, and the cheetahs were not behaving the way I needed them to behave. So I had to sort of on the fly readjust the way I collected data, because they always surprise you. And that's what I love about animal behavior, is that no matter how much you watch animals and how much you think you know about them, there's always more surprising things to learn. And you can't get cocky, because they will blow your preconceptions out of the water, or they will throw some new thing in the mix, and you just think, why are you doing that? This doesn't make sense to me. And it's just such a fascinating puzzle to figure out.
Have you ever come in like close contact with them, or kind of, did they run at you anytime?
So we had sort of specific guidelines to follow, so that, because as researchers, we really don't want to impact their behavior. So we would stay 25 meters away from them when we first arrive. And when they're hunting, we sort of don't move the car while they're stalking, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes they're, you know, really chill around cars, and occasionally they would approach your car. And some of the most delightful and special times was when, especially young cheetahs, a couple of young cheetahs do this. They would jump on the hood of
Yeah,
the
I've seen
car.
those. Yes.
You're just staring at their face from like a foot away. And it
Right.
is absolutely incredible experience, because you just can't really prepare yourself to being that close to a big cat.
Yeah.
And there's this weird, like they look at you, but they don't seem to really recognize what you are through the glass. But you notice, like, you definitely get that feeling of, I'm a primate and there is a
Yeah.
large predator very close to me, and the sort of
Right.
basal part of your brain is lighting up a bit.
Right. The rush, the adrenaline rush, like, what if I get mauled?
Yeah, I mean, this, and you know, you're in a car, it's fairly safe. There's the thing that makes me uncomfortable is that some tourist cars are open, so they have open tops or they have
Right.
open sides, and the possibility of actual physical interaction between any sort of animal in that situation and humans is worrying, because it's always the animal that's going to end up paying the price if something negative happens. I mean, a
Right.
human might be injured because they're scared or they make a move, and the animal reacts. But in most situations, you know, if someone gets mauled, you know, the cheetah or the leopard or the lion is the one who's going to be put down. And so I'm really down on interactions between humans and animals that encourage actual direct physical interaction. So I was always very happy to have glass or metal between
Right.
between us. But when they're on the hood, you can like see the little details. Like you can look at their eye. Sometimes, like you can see that, oh, they've got a tick right below their eye, and you know, you can't see that necessarily from 25 meters away.
Right.
And sometimes they would sneeze on the windscreen, and you'd have these like cheetah nose prints all over your windscreen, and you could hear her. It was magical. The thing that's a little frustrating is, so they would sometimes jump on the hood, and then sometimes they'd go on top of the car, which is like, yeah, I got a cheetah on my car, but you can't see them. You know, unless you like crane your neck out the window or something. And then sometimes all you can see is a hanging down. And so you've got this amazing cheetah on your car, and you can't move the car, but you can't collect data on them because you can't see them. You can't watch them because you can't, sort of stuck in the car,
Right.
not being able to do anything. And it's so that was sometimes frustrating. But once a cheetah pooped on top of my car, and I went up later and found the poop, and it was a poop I needed, and it was like the easiest poop collection ever. Wow. And I was really happy.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it must have been desperate, and then it just comes and, lands right at your feet. And that's how it is.
Yeah. It's better than, you know, walking around the grassland sniffing for it.
Right.
It was so much easier just to be like, oh, it's on the top of my car. Excellent.
Yeah. Have you seen them hunting at night? How it is? Like, how was it when they had at nights?
Oh. So that was one of the things that I assumed they didn't do. So the original design for my PhD research was that I wanted to record every hunt that an individual cheetah did, while also recording how many gazelles there were around them, because I wanted to look at prey density and hunting behavior. And so my thought was this: I was like, okay, I'll find a cheetah, I'll stay with it all day, and then I'll watch it kind of bed down for the night, and then I'll drive away and camp somewhere, and then I'll get up at dawn and be right there, find that cheetah again before it gets active for the day. Because my assumption was they didn't move at night, and I just couldn't find them again in the morning. Like I would, you know, they were moving at night, at least some of them, and I just couldn't guarantee that I'd be able to follow the same cheetah for multiple days, because I'd lose them at night. And then while I was there for my PhD research, the project hired Dennis Minja to be the project manager. And so he was out as well. And then he would sometimes call me and say, hey, you know, I saw so-and-so at 3 p.m. yesterday, and I just saw them again at 9 a.m. and they are fat, they are full.
Oh.
And so they are hunting at night occasionally. I've never seen it because we weren't allowed to be out at night except camping. We weren't allowed to drive around things, but yeah, it's one of those things where I assumed I knew their activity patterns and they were like, surprise!
Right.
And so, and I think I've seen footage, like fancy modern footage, like of night vision of cheetahs moving around and hunting at night.
Yeah.
So it does happen.
I think I remember seeing something on Netflix too. It was basically about hunting at nights and the nightlife on Earth or something on Netflix. I'm not really sure of the title, but yeah, it was pretty much about these animals, and it was all infrared cameras, to show them hunting. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Sorry, you were saying something. I didn't mean to cut you off.
So I think their activity patterns can vary quite a bit depending on what other forces are happening. And so my understanding is that, especially in really hot areas, so places like Botswana and Namibia, they may be more likely to hunt at night just because it's too hot during the day,
Right.
and nighttime is sort of thermally better for them.
Right.
But it also, one of the reasons we assumed that they didn't hunt much at night in Serengeti is because that's when the lions and hyenas are really active. And so it just seemed like it would be more dangerous for them to be out and about, moving around, dealing with prey, when that's also when lions and hyenas are doing that. And it would just be safer for them to do it during the day when lions and hyenas are sleeping mostly.
Right.
But in areas that don't have very many or no lions or hyenas, they may, their temporal patterns may be completely different. They may have the freedom to hunt whenever they want, which may completely shift how they arrange their day in the night, I guess.
Interesting. And moving on from the cheetahs, I want to talk about your science communication projects. So before we actually get onto your projects, I want to understand what is science communication to you, because there's no hard and fast rule about what, like, everybody follows their own way to express science or articulate science. So what is science communication to you?
I'm not entirely sure I have sort of a formal definition.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's a personal
So
opinion.
I just love telling stories about the animal behavior that I've seen and sharing pictures, and sort of using storytelling as a way to get people who don't see these animals or don't have experience with them to know more about their behavior, their anatomy, their interactions with other animals. And storytelling is a really sort of engaging thing, rather than just being like, cheetahs are the fastest mammal. You sort of spewing fact is fun. But if you're telling a story about, hey, I was once out in the field and I saw, I was with two males named Richard and Armitage, and they had brought down this gazelle, and then a hyena came, and X and Y happened. You can talk about hunting behavior. You can talk about interactions between males in a coalition. You can talk about prey anti-predator behavior. You can talk about the interactions with other large carnivores. Like, all of these topics can be woven into a story that you then illustrate with pictures. And it gets people's attention. That's kind of the way I got into it, was when I was in the field in 2014 doing my PhD work. And I realized that actually people are kind of interested in how field work, what's going on. And so I would just sort of a little bit about what had happened that day and show some pictures, and people seemed really into it. And I think one sort of what I realized as I went along is that I was talking about, because I study hunting behavior, I was talking about a behavior that has sort of a visceral excitement for a lot of people, but also something that isn't always covered by nature documentaries. Like, they really want the drama of the hunt, but they tend to cut away from the really gory, like actually killing and eating and that sort of thing. But that's what I was focused on. So I was talking about that kind of thing, and I had all these pictures of gory kills, and so it gave people another a view that they hadn't necessarily seen into an aspect of carnivore behavior that is often kind of glossed over or ignored in conventional documentaries. And so I think that was part of the appeal, is it was this sort of new aspect of behavior that wasn't talked about very much. I think things have changed since then, but that was initially was the angle that people seemed to find interesting about what I was saying, was sort of direct experiences in the field, plus talking about big, exciting carnivores doing things that they hadn't necessarily really seen that much of before.
Right.
And that has sort of, since then, I've kind of broadened out a little bit, but mostly I just love to share my passion for mammals and carnivores, using pictures, using anecdote, using fun facts to just sort of get the word to whoever's interested. And then sometimes you can talk about conservation or other sort of serious topics. But once they have that emotional connection to what you're talking about, it's easier to bring them along on some of the harder, more thoughtful topics.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you lay the premise and tell them that, yeah, this is interesting. And you give them the facts and a lot of new things, like, you know, like you rightly pointed out, what we see on TV is the drama and the hunt and the kill, but what goes beyond that, before and after that, is, yeah, we don't get to see that, which is, yeah, I think, which is why scientists should talk about, you know, what they're doing. Yeah, it gives you a personal satisfaction that, oh, you know what, you're just contributing something to the field of science, and you're making a difference, and you're also telling that to general public, especially to kids who are interested in science, and it's definitely inspiring for them to learn what's happening, and probably broaden their you know, interests and the fields of interest, basically. Um, and yeah, so what are your ongoing science communication projects? I know you blog about them. I've read your blogs, and you actively tweet photographs and information. Besides that, like, what are your ongoing science communication projects?
So the major project that I'm involved with is called March Mammal Map, which is a Twitter-based competition of various mammals who sort of, we write battles that we then put on Twitter of these animals fighting, and then it's sort of like a championship where you have various battles, and eventually
Oh,
the
wow.
two battle it out. And it's in its 9th year, I think, and it was started by a couple of people, and the main person who runs it is Dr. Katie Hind at Arizona State University. And so she has built this amazing team of people like me who narrate the battles, but then there's artists involved, there's geneticists involved, there's librarians involved who bring all the material together. And so it's not just sort of, hey, cool stuff happening on Twitter. There's a whole curriculum built around it that K through 12 teachers and university educators use in their classrooms, whether they're teaching zoology or biology or anatomy or ecology or conservation or evolution. Like, all of these aspects come into the way we write the battles about these animals. Because what we do is we sort of research their physical anatomy and their behavior and where they live and their ecology. And then we have to come up with ways that they would interact. You take two species that sometimes they would interact in real life, and sometimes they're from completely different places. And you kind of have to figure out, okay, you have an animal that behaves like this and lives in this type of place versus this animal. What would happen if they met, and come up with sort of a biologically plausible encounter. And a lot of the time, sometimes we pitch it as like, yeah, fights to the death. But a lot of the time, actually, and this happens in nature a lot, they don't necessarily interact aggressively. Like, sometimes we have them just kind of seeing each other and being like, oh, no, don't like this, and then retreating. Or they sort of test each other out and then realize that's not cool. Or, you know, one of them gets snatched by a predator before they even meet or something. So it's a way to highlight the diversity of mammal life even though we are bringing in non-mammals, so the diverse general biodiversity, the various strategies around hunting and aggression, but also around coexistence. Like the more we, because this is an exciting thing, I think, for me in animal behavior, is the more camera trap data we have, especially with video camera traps, the more we realize that animals interact without fighting a lot of the time. Like we're starting to see footage from like carcasses where you have wolves and coyotes and eagles, and sometimes they fight, and sometimes they're just all there sharing this meal. And so I think of the misconceptions around animal behavior is that it's always red in tooth and claw, it's always aggressive. But one of the things we're trying to show is that there's a lot of strategies animals have to avoid aggression, because aggression is dangerous. And,
Right.
Unless you're going to win, you don't want to do it necessarily. And so we can highlight all these sort of coexistence strategies that animals have to deal with either large, scary things or small things that aren't a threat to you. I mean, some of them are bullies, like we're talking about, cats are bullies.
Yeah.
And so see a lot of aggression. But a lot of species are not like that. And so one of the things we can do with the way that we write the battles is show how various things can interact in a plethora of ways. And we get a lot of pushback. Sometimes people are like, there wasn't carnage. I wanted there to be blood in that battle. It's like,
Yeah.
not everything ends.
Right. I know. It's not the ending that you expect, but it's still an ending, which is great. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is pretty
Yeah.
interesting. Like, I didn't know that, they learn to coexist at times. You always see them, oh, okay, that's a cheetah, so that's going to be a bird and that's going to be dead in a while. But yeah, it's interesting to know that, it's not the case all the time. It's pretty great.
Yeah. And I think that may be a relic of the nature programs that we see, because they sort of have to bring drama. Because no one wants to watch a cheetah sleep for 12 hours except for me.
Right.
So there's always this focus on the dramatic and focus on conflict. And I think that has helped create this narrative that sort of animal lives are full of constant conflict and drama. And it's like, well, actually, no, they spend a lot of time eating and sleeping.
Right. I mean, yeah, with the amount of work, with the amount of running they do, I'm pretty sure they'll be exhausted and they need to, chill out and recoup all the energy.
Yeah, they spend, I mean, that's the thing. If you're a person who sort of watches animals for their behavior, a lot of it's really boring. Like a lot of animals spend a lot of time not doing much at all. And so
Right.
it's not like constant onslaught of exciting things to look at. Most of the time you're just watching an animal rest.
Yeah, it's like 5 hours of footage and then just 20 minutes of action in it.
If that, it's like 20 seconds, woo, they're gonna do something. And then the rest of the time you're like, oh my gosh. But to sort of bring it back to March Madness, this is a program kind of run by, we're all volunteers, but it reached, I think, 5,500 educators used the materials this year, because it just happened this March.
Wow.
And they were teaching 400,000 students all across the US. So it sort of turned into this really massive educational / edutainment situation that reaches a lot of people, both through social media and through sort of classrooms. And especially this year, when a lot of teachers were sort of burnt out after a year of online teaching that they weren't particularly trained to do at the beginning, this was a lot of comments being very grateful for this. Was sort of a really fun way to engage their students who had been kind of flagging after the whole 2020 situation. So
Great.
yeah.
Wow, that's great. And if someone's interested in pursuing science communication as a profession, like I see a lot of scientists and people who are in the field of research pursue science communication either as a profession or like as an interest. They just sort of interest. They start a blog or they start talking about it. Like that's how I got into it. Like it was purely because of Twitter, and I was interested in a lot of particular things in a lot of areas of science. And I thought this would be the best way to talk to people in that field and, get your question answered. So it's basically out of pure curiosity. But, if you want to refine your skills and if you want to actively get into this, what are some courses and, how can people enroll into them and, how to go about into this professionally? Do you have any suggestion?
I mean, I don't do it professionally. I just sort of do it on the side because I really enjoy it. So I
Right.
don't have the best grasp of how to do it and make money.
Okay.
But so my advice will probably not be particularly helpful if you're trying to sort of monetize what you're doing.
Hmm.
Um, but I would start, if you want to get into science communication, whether you're a scientist or not, start with what interests you and what you find exciting, and read and watch the things that engage you and sort of try to understand what about it what about it sort of hooks into you, and what about it is it that makes you think, oh yeah, this is exciting, this is fascinating. And you can compare that to sort of unsuccessful ways of science communication. Be like, okay, what is the difference between this thing that is really dry and I don't get into it at all versus this thing that I'm like, yes, this is okay, this is cool, and then
Right.
makes you sort of learn more. Um, and there are, I mean, I don't know any specific resources off the top of my head, but there are a bunch of resources online that will have sort of the basic structures of, to engage, the best practices to engage an audience, and the best practices to, and then there's the whole other side of what platforms you use and the various sort of cultures, because like Twitter has a different culture than, say,
Right.
is sort of a different way of communicating than doing a blog, or using Instagram or Facebook, or having your own website or having a YouTube channel. So there are so many ways that you can get into science communication, just because there's so many platforms now that
Right.
aren't gate kept. So it used to be that only sort of media professionals or whatever had the tools to disseminate science communication, and they really decided what stories got told. And what I think is really great about social media is that that has kind of gone away. And so there are ups and downs to it, but
Yeah.
as any scientist, whether you, no matter how junior you are or how new you are, you can tell a story about your cool research or something you find interesting or something like that. And it's more about your communication skills rather than your credentials as a senior scientist that makes science communication people successful.
Right.
Um, so there's been this sort of opening and broadening of the people who tell stories about science and which stories they tell, that I think is really, really good and exciting, and makes things much more interesting and shows a much bigger picture of who's doing science and what science they're doing, and all of the various factors that go into that. So I would say, if you feel like, what am I going to do? I've just started out in this field, I don't really have stories to tell. Don't let that stop you. Like there's so
Yeah.
much to tell. Um, so, but also, like, yeah, read up on best practices, and look at stuff that you find exciting and interesting, and try to figure out what it is. Because it's sort of the same thing as teaching. Like great teachers are good to understand how to teach well, but I also look at the professors and the teachers I had who were terrible, and
Yeah.
try to sort of that apart and be like, okay, why was that such a bad experience, and how do I not do something like that? So you can do that sort of as well with communication, because the skills
Right.
are pretty similar. Like, an effective teacher is
Exactly.
about
Articulation.
communicating effectively.
Right. Exactly.
um, yeah, so, but it's so exciting to me that so many people are getting into science communication.
Right.
um,
Right.
Fantastic.
Like I got into actively got into this probably in the last 2 or 3 years. I did write a couple of articles and stuff, but I was really passionate about science, but I didn't know how to participate or how to, what to do with it. But then, I mean, thanks to Twitter, that's where I started following a lot of scientists, and then they started talking about their work, and I found it very interesting, and I see the community grow over years, and especially with the pandemic, I think people have understood the importance of communicating science because there's a lot of misconceptions going on. So yeah, I'm glad it's the field day for scientists, at least in the last 1, 2 years, thanks to pandemic. I think that's the upside of the pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic has been a real lesson in sort of the limits of science communication and also the possibilities of it and best practices and not best practices, and even
Right.
kind of you can use all the best practices and there will still be things that don't get across, or barriers
Right.
that are still there. That's going to be an interesting lesson, I think, for all of us science communicators, is like, okay, when things are really tough and really important, how do we do this the best way? And I'm definitely not a person with answers, but it's been
Yeah.
really interesting, especially on social media, to watch various aspects of that unfold.
Yeah, and the example of that is like where like we're trying to use social media to spread the right word, and again, it's also another medium where you can just spread any rumor about it. Like there was like one case, and then you hype it up, and then or post a lot of myths and misconceptions. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's how pros and cons of social media. But yeah, thank you very much. Before I end this, is there something that you want the audience to know? Something that maybe I missed out in my questions? Is there something that you want to add to our conversation so far?
I think we covered a lot of cool topics. But
Okay.
I would just, say that cheetahs are a fascinating, amazing species, and they have a lot of thorny conservation issues that don't necessarily have particularly easy answers. But if you are excited about big cats and cheetahs, I sort of urge you to educate yourself more on cheetahs and the issues around them. And then if you have a way that you can get involved with big cat conservation, you can do that. But again, it's like these issues are tough and they're not necessarily
Right.
easy to solve. So we need a lot of really smart, bright people all over the world to think about it. So I hope that your viewers will.
Great. So thank you very much, and I hope you all had a great time. Talking, listening to us talk about cheetahs and the different hunting behavior. We have really cool stuff coming up in the upcoming weeks. So subscribe and share and talk about this channel. We would love to hear your opinions and your feedback. You can write to me. You can tweet out to me. You can send me an email. It's all in the description. And I'm also gonna add Anne's Twitter handle in the description. So if you really you found this talk to be really interesting, and if you have any questions, you can reach out to her directly. Once again, thank you very much for your time, Anne. It's a pleasure having you. And I can't believe it's already been an hour and a half. And it just felt so organic. It didn't feel like an interview, and it didn't feel like I was talking to someone I don't know. But yeah, it's been a great experience talking to you.
This was really fun. It's just so great to talk to you about things that I care so much about.
Right. And it reflects, like, I can see that passion, and it just reflects in the way you express. So yeah, it's really great.
Thanks. Thank you.